Hi, all. Welcome back. We're going to continue and finish up the endocrine system. Again, this is just kind of an overview of the endocrine system. There's lots of other glands, special glands, and things like that that can secrete hormones and play a big role in homeostasis within the body. We're going to talk about some of those other glands, like the pineal gland and the thymus, and some other things like um, the testes and other regions of the body that might be secreting different types of hormones at different periods of time. So if we start off talking about the pineal gland, depending on the organism, will depend on kind of where this gland is associated. So I don't know if you're familiar. There's certain organisms on the planet that we often say, well, they have a third eye. For example, like the lizard that's called the tuatara that lives in New Zealand. You can actually see it, and so they have a light sensing spot on the top of their head. Well, that's their pineal gland. Ours happens to be fairly deep in our brain, but it does the same thing. It really regulates day-night cycles. So we don't have to have light shine on the pineal gland, but other organisms do. Instead, our pineal gland is connected to the secretion of melatonin. Melatonin is directly related to kind of day and light cycles. So based on how much light is coming into your eyes during the day, stimulates the or doesn't stimulate, one or the other, the secretion of melatonin, which then tells us basically whether it's daytime or nighttime, which gives us this ability to be tired and go to sleep or stay awake. So fairly important for just normal daily functions, and why individuals have a very difficult time staying up for long periods of time. It's because the secretion of melatonin or the blockage of melatonin changes the rhythm of our circadian rhythms. Okay, the thymus. This is a small gland that occurs between the lungs and the mediastinum. And it's really important for the immune system. We're not going to make it to the immune system until much later, and most of you will get this in a different course if you continue. But the immune system, one of the specialized cells in the immune system is called T lymphocytes, and so we have different types of T lymphocytes. We have memory T lymphocytes and killer T lymphocytes, but the purpose of them is to basically go around and destroy things that they have been presented with. So they're presented with pieces of protein or fat or carbohydrates, and they seek it out and they destroy it. So it's a really, really important piece of the immune system. And that gland right there secretes thymosin, and thymosin promotes the production of T lymphocytes. So when you are sick or you have a cough or you have pneumonia or something like that that's related to a lung infection, okay, that's why this gland is really close to your lungs. It can be stimulated very easily to promote the production of more immune cells to try to fight off that invasion. Right? And then, of course, there's lots of other glands. There's glands that are associated with just the kidney that might produce erythropoietin, okay, which is going to stimulate red blood cell formation. So the kidney, again, very important for filtration and management of kind of sodium and water and stuff like that. But it also can stimulate if you have if you become anemic and you don't have enough red blood cells, it can stimulate the formation of new red blood cells. Lots of other things, digestive glands, reproductive organs, other things that are just excreting hormones that have different purposes. Some to help with sperm production, some to help with milk production, some to help with digestion of food bolus, like all kinds of different things. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about all of them. Well, what I want to kind of finish up talking about is the role that stress plays in production of hormones or regulation of hormones, and so it's pretty important, especially for college students, because stress in college can be fairly severe, depending on your situation. You know, it could be the first time you don't live at home, the first time you've ever got something less than an A. Lots of different things, you know, can develop stress, and there are a couple ways at which we deal with stress. Again, we talked about this when we first started about talking about the endocrine system. The purpose of the endocrine system is to maintain homeostasis. There's a couple ways that you can do that. Okay, you can do that through neuron stimulation. You can do that through hormonal stimulation. And you know, neuron stimulation can be the result of things like sensory organs picking up some kind of sense, and then sending a neurotransmission to the brain, and then the brain can stimulate the glands either through a neurotransmission, or you know, through a neurotransmission that's then going to excrete a hormone, and then the hormone might be transferred to a new region and stimulate a new hormone, other things. Okay, we already talked about this. So all of this is related to homeostasis, trying to maintain a stable system. Okay? This is very important because when you're when you're given a stressor, okay, it will knock your body off that normal production, that normal kind of homeostatic homeostatic kind of system, okay, for lack of a better term. Because of that, it can be extremely dangerous, okay, when you lose homeostasis. Right? When you lose homeostasis, you can start losing or having effects on many different systems in the body. For example, let's say we lost homeostasis on calcium, and you're like, well, so what, right? I mean, calcium is great for bones, but I've already done growing, and you know, I don't need as much calcium. Well, that's not the only thing calcium's good for. Remember how neurons work. Remember how muscles get stimulated. All this is uses calcium. And so if some kind of stressor affects your calcium levels and you lose homeostasis around calcium, then not only is your bone material might need to be deteriorated because you don't have enough calcium in the blood system, your neurons might not fire as fast, your actin myosins might not cross-link as quickly, so your muscles might not fire, or they might not retract as fast. There's all kinds of situations where if you lose homeostasis around just one ion, you can have detrimental effects to the body. Okay, and lots of this really has to do with sensory nerves. Okay, and we talked about these sensory nerves that are going to affect kind of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will then excrete either a hormone, or will stimulate the excretion of a hormone in the pituitary gland, okay, or send blood and send a signal to excrete hormones from the adrenal gland, all different cases. Adrenal gland is really, really important. We talked about this one a couple lectures ago. Remember, this is what's going to be releasing epinephrine or norepinephrine, and adrenaline or noradrenaline, and that's really what kind of is giving us one of the ways in which we tolerate stress, and that's fight or flight response. Okay, so lots of different stressors and stresses that can stimulate the stressors. Okay, so you can have like psychological stressors or psychological stress, which is going to relate to psychological stressors, okay, where you could be actually in danger, okay, or maybe you're in fear of danger, okay, so maybe you're afraid of heights, maybe you're afraid of the dark, maybe you're afraid of swimming in the ocean, okay, these are psychological stressors, and they can really stimulate the production of hormones, okay, and you can get kind of a fight or flight response often. Okay, so it's basically if you're standing on a ladder in a windstorm, and you're afraid of heights, then you're probably not going to be on that ladder for very long. Okay, and that's the psychological stress giving a stressor a signal, and then you're getting the adrenal gland to release adrenaline, and you're getting off that ladder as fast as possible. Physical stressors, there's lots of them. Okay, you can have injuries, you can be deficient of oxygen, too much temperature, too hot, too cold, that kind of stuff. Infections are very interesting because there's a threshold of an infection before you can get this physical stress, and it depends on the type of infection. If you're really interested in that, I suggest taking a course on microbiology, and we talk about that a lot. All right, let's talk about this hypothalamus control to the response to stressors. We already kind of talked about it stimulating the pituitary gland in a couple different ways. It can stimulate it via a nerve impulse, or it can stimulate via a blood connection, which means that it's releasing a hormone. Okay? Either way, we can say that different stressors can create what we call a GAS, or a general adaptation syndrome. So you're adapting to different stress and stressor responses. Okay? And so there's two ways that you can associate that. Okay? You can have an alarm stage. Okay? This really has to do with the fight or flight response. This has to do with the adrenal gland releasing, often this has to do with the adrenal gland releasing epinephrine or adrenaline, and you get these different responses. They're quick, they don't last long, and your heart rate goes up, your breathing rate goes up. Okay, you're passing lots of blood. Skeletal muscles are really ready to go. So you're moving as fast as possible, kind of thing, but it doesn't last very long. Okay? So this is really normally what we associate with like an alarm stage. You get jump scared, or maybe you're afraid of snakes and someone brings a snake in, or you're afraid of spiders and you see one. And so these are really quick responses, but then you go back to normal heart rate, normal breathing rate, etc. Now you can have a continuation of the stimulus. Okay, so you can, if that stimulus is continued, so maybe you're truly afraid of spiders and someone has one and they keep approaching you and getting closer to you and closer to you, okay, or they keep stimulating you with that kind of alarm signal, then you can intensify that and prolong that response for a while. but not to the degree of what we call resistance staging. Okay, these are longer stimuli, slower stimuli, often have to do with uh, change in glucose, and just in general, it's a long-term response. And that long-term response is a response to a continuous stimuli that you may not be even aware of. Okay, so for example, we know that this sometimes happens in regions like urban environments where maybe on a hourly or every couple hours you hear lots of stressing noises. Maybe you hear horns honking, sirens, people yelling, trains coming by, airplanes in the sky. And so your ears are being stimulated constantly by signals that would normally give you an alarm stage. Okay, so if you hear sirens, normally you're getting an alarm stage from that, especially like if you don't hear it very often and you hear a siren, then you're alert. Okay, but if it's continuous every single day for very long periods of time, it becomes part of this resistance stage. And you start interacting with that signal and you're stimulated by that signal constantly over a long period of time. And there's lots of ways at which it can affect the body. So when you've had this occur for many, many periods of time, so depending on the individual, it could be continuous stimulation for hours upon hours. It could be days, it could be months, it could be even years. Eventually, you may get into the exhaustion stage. Okay, and this is a point where you've been in the resistance stage for a long period of time. Okay? When you've been in that resistance stage for a long period of time and you've had continuous stimuli, your hormones are continuously increased over a long period of time, different things start to occur. Normally, your muscles start to deteriorate. Your body starts to go through cells in certain regions go through apoptosis. They go through cell death, programmed cell death, because there's just not enough nutrients. And so your core might be hogging all those nutrients. You might be burning up all your reserves of sugar. Okay, you might have an electrolyte imbalance because now you are constantly using up as much calcium as possible. And so you've reached kind of, from that resistance stage, you kind of reach this exhaustion stage. Okay? Once that occurs, there are certain things that occur along with it, or can. You can get a suppressed immune system. Okay, and whether that be the lack of triggering from the thymus, your lack of triggering of the production of new white blood cells, could be that you're not getting the triggering of other larger macrophiles or larger white blood cells being triggered for production, or it could be that you're continuously stimulating the immune system, that the immune system now is being overstimulated and you don't have enough energy to maintain it, so it becomes suppressed. And individuals in this exhaustion stage are very susceptible to bacterial infections and viral infections. Okay, so typically this is the result of long-term oversecretion of cortisol. Okay, and if it happens for long enough, it can result in death. Okay, and we see this in individuals like that are stimulated for long periods of time. They become in this exhaustion stage, and then they can die. It's not typical of like normal everyday life. I'm not trying to say this occurs in like, if you live in the city, but if you're stimulated like this, if you're like a prisoner of war, or if you're tortured or things like that, this is where those stimulations might occur so much that you move from the resistance stage into the exhaustion stage and you can't recover. So the homeostasis is so out of balance, your body can't recover, and the end result may be death. Okay, so let's kind of look at how this would work on a flow chart. So you have some kind of stress signal. Remember, this could be temperature, it could be light, it could be anything that is going to stimulate one of the sensories. It could be pain, all kinds of things. And we talked about the sensory organs, and so that's where that's going to come in. That's a stressor. It's going to be picked up by one of the sensory organ or sensory cells, and it's going to send that signal to the hypothalamus. Okay? And I mean other pieces of the brain, the cortex and things like that, and they're going to interpret the signal, and then some of that's going to be sent, some of that signal is going to be sent to the hypothalamus. That hypothalamus has a couple different ways at which it can deal with that signal. It can send a sympathetic impulse, which is going to go to the adrenal gland on your kidney, okay? Or it can send a kind of a hormonal release, and in this case, we're talking about cortisol. So then it's going to release cortisol releasing hormone, which is then going to be associated with the anterior portion of the pituitary gland, and that's going to stimulate the production of other hormones, okay, which then can stimulate the adrenal cortex, and you can get different ways at which we respond to this. The adrenal cortex is going to give you long-term adjustments. The adrenal medulla is going to give you short-term adjustments. Okay? So either way, we can actually have and move from kind of a short-term or long-term resistance stage. Okay? Either way, you can result in overstimulation. Okay? It may start off as a short-term fight or flight response. Because the stressor is going to the same region, though, over time, if the short term becomes now long term, you might have a different pathway. You might have cortisol that's now being released, and now you're dealing with that stressor or that signal from a long-term perspective. Okay? And different ways at which this occurs. Okay, remember, short term, you're just burning through glucose that's already in the body typically. Okay, so you're going to increase your blood glucose level, so maybe you're going to pull off glycogen from the muscles and burn through that carbohydrate, increase your blood glucose, okay, which will do short-term responses, increase heart rate, blood pressure, things like that. Maybe dilate the eyes, increase your respiration rate, these kind of things, all due to a single stressor or a couple stressors that's going on. Okay? Some people get addicted to this. Addicted to kind of this response of the release of adrenaline. Okay, individuals that are like X Factor athletes and things like that, where they might, do cliff diving, and then they might do, I don't know, like all kinds of things. They might, do things that are stimulating lots of sensory organs at one time, okay, and they might produce a massive amount of adrenaline, and they get addicted to kind of the response of their body to it. They like that rush of glucose, that rush of energy, that increase in heart rate, that increase in respiration rate, etc. Okay? And that's good. It's a good thing. The opposite side is a more long-term effect, and those stressors can be released cortisol, which then can kind of use up your glucose, start breaking down proteins, start breaking down fats, things like that. So now it's not a quick release. It's not using up just blood glucose, but now you're starting to break down other portions of your body. And if it goes into kind of that long-term stage, then you can start breaking down actual muscle. You can break down, parts of organs and destroy cells and things like that because you're trying to get that increase in energy over a long period of time. All right, let's look at some lifespan changes as you age, what's happening. Okay, most of the time what's happening is what you would expect. These glands are just cells. And cells, as we talked about before, they have a half-life, or what we call a Hayflick limit. Okay, so they have a limit on how many times they can replicate and how long they last, and eventually they die. Okay, or eventually they develop a small mutation and they can't replicate anymore. So over your life, your different glands, whether we're talking about the adrenal gland or we're talking about the pituitary gland or even the hypothalamus, these different regions of your body, the glands start to decrease in size, but they also start to decrease in function. So as life goes on, they get smaller, they produce less hormones. Okay? So when you produce less hormones, you tend to have a problem with that. So if you're producing less growth hormone, okay, then muscle and skeletal strength starts to decrease. Okay? If you're producing less of hormones that are associated with blood flow or the ability to remove salts or keep water back, then you tend to urinate more often. You might carry more um, sodium out of the body, so that drags more water out of the body, and so you become dehydrated faster. If you don't produce enough calcium, you start removing the calcium that's already been deposited in the bone through the skeletal system. So you start removing calcium from the bones, and individuals develop osteoporosis. Okay? We already talked about the PTH and the role that it plays in stimulating bone growth, but there's lots of different ways. Okay, and depending on the sex of the individual, sometimes your other glands, your reproductive regions can be stimulating or causing these changes to occur faster because maybe you're a female and you're producing estrogen, and it might change the PTH levels faster. Lots of different ways at which this can occur. Okay, changes in melatonin. Okay, so your secretion, that's going to affect that kind of hourly body clock kind of thing, and so can be beneficial, cannot be beneficial. Sometimes, you have, as you increase, you take more naps, okay, because you're tired more often. But sometimes, you have individuals that their kind of biological clock or body clock is thrown off, and so they'll go to bed at like 9 o'clock and they'll wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I mean, there's lots of different ways in which this can occur.